Boom, and we're live. Thanks everybody for tuning in to another episode of Man with Purpose. Today I have a very special guest. His name is Kevinhelas. So Kevin is a life navigator and a men's work facilitator. He has led and co-facilitated workshops around the globe. He is also the founder of Man to Man Project. Man to Man Project explores the relationships men have with one another, and this is a topic that I really want to dive into today. I've actually known Kevin for maybe like a year now, more than a year. We met at more than a year,
It
right?
might be even 3 years, 3 or 4 years, maybe. Goodness, yeah.
It feels like it. And we did a workshop, kind of a retreat, but he was there and facilitating. We just kind of stayed in touch ever since. So, Kevin, thank you very much for being again on the show.
I'm very happy to be here. Thanks, Pav.
You're actually the first person that's actually twice on this show. It's quality content there.
Fantastic.
Again, thank you for being here. I normally start the conversations by doing just a quick check-in. So I'd invite you just to relax, take a deep breath, and whenever you're ready, just share how you're feeling right now.
Yeah, I think I can feel some sort of nervous excitement. I think there's just anticipating this conversation, not really knowing where it's going to go. Pleased to be meeting with you again and following up on what the conversation we've already had. And very pleased to be part of it. I think, I'm very impressed by the work you're doing and how you're reaching out and connecting and finding men working in this field and supporting the work that men are doing in this field. So I think it's a follow on from my day as well. I don't want to go on too long, but I had a very powerful men's circle this morning where it's a similar sort of feeling of like constant reminder of the value of creating these spaces and having these conversations.
Wow. I'm very grateful that you're doing this work because I've been fortunate enough to be with you in this kind of space, ritual space, both in a retreat and afterwards. We've done multiple men's calls. So I know how potent this work is, and also especially when you are there and your presence and your gifts and your wisdom. I'm checking with a lot of gratitude just by virtue of talking to you. I'm already just like, wow, okay, this is going to be a good interview.
Fantastic. Yeah. Well, obviously what I've been reflecting on actually, because this is really not about me, but I think about the spaces that are created when we enter into conversation in a way, in a sort of an authentic way, in a vulnerable way, in an expressive way. And it was, I think, something we can sort of talk about. I wanted to sort of further the discussion we had earlier, but I think it's something which just deepens and grows. And the men I was speaking to this morning are men that, some of whom you might know, but the men that took part in an online course which I ran last year, in which a lot of it is about self-exploration in the company of other men. So it's like a marriage of self-development, self-realization, transformational work in a men's work context. And obviously in this time with, lockdown, with Zoom, everything has been, it's screen-based. But the inquiry that took place with a group of men, I'm just starting to realize the power of that. When I set up the course, I had a fairly clear idea of the sort of the map of the course and the things I wanted to cover, but I wasn't really sure where it would go or, how it would develop. And these guys that got involved in the first phase were really, I really look at them as explorers, people who are like wanting to go on a journey. And we're going on it together and we're not really sure where we're going or where we'll end up. But what's come from that is it's very vivid illustration of what's available when you start tapping into this space, you know. And men I've seen transform in 6 months simply by being given the invitation to share themselves and to express themselves and to voice things, to be witnessed, and for other men to hear them and to also sort of, you know, resonate with what they're saying. The level of expression that has opened up on those men is remarkable. They're not recognizable as the same men. And I think it's important to take stock of that, of like looking back at where we ourselves are in our own sort of journey and our self-development and our levels of expression and what we, it's almost like there's a spiral that takes place the more we just own up and acknowledge everything and can voice everything about ourselves. As painful as it can be at the start, or difficult it can be at the start, you know, it's of such value. It's incredible.
Wow. You know, hearing you talk about this experience really reminds me of the retreat that we did together with another organization called Rebel Wisdom. Shout out to them. And you can kind of see almost like the sacrificial lambs coming in with no idea what's about to happen. Like, oh, well, yeah, I was speaking with a couple of people. Yeah, my father brought me here, or my girlfriend told me to come. And you can kind of see everybody's kind of feeling out what's going to happen. There's this kind of really elephant in the room of the unknown. Nobody knows what, I mean, for the most part, I kind of had an idea, but even I wasn't prepared for what the potent experience that was. So yeah, I like to think I can understand and also experience what that was. But that's a very special thing. I think for most men, they've never felt something like this, and this is so needed. So thank you for doing that work. I know that you're helping out a lot of men to really look in themselves, perhaps in a different way.
Yeah, and I'd certainly like to acknowledge, you know, the guys, the Rebel Wisdom team, David and Alexander, who have gone from there to be, you know, they've opened up, and from, you know, it's remarkable to see what the vision that they had as well about, you know, ushering in a new way of being, not just for men, but for the planet, and for, you know, how we navigate this new world and how we start playing a part in creating it. So they've sort of gone on from strength to strength and obviously moved in different directions right now. But I'm sure there'll be more opportunities for those retreats. I'm really interested in setting those up, or something of that nature here as well, where I am.
Sure.
So,
Wow.
Yeah.
I want to touch upon something that we talked about before the actual interview, and it's the notion of most men looking to live beyond survival, you know, looking to come out of this place of separation, which I think you had a very much experienced that throughout the course, and by virtue of speaking to other men. So can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, and this is an ongoing journey, you know. I think in my own personal exploration, I've been very conscious of living from this place, of living from survival. And I'm also interested in people speaking about this, people such as Charles Eisenstein, who's, you know, phenomenal intellect, but he's someone who speaks from the heart around looking at the context in which we live. So, you know, a lot of his books, I was amazed when I was looking at his book, The More Beautiful World Our Hearts Know As Possible, is from 2003, I think. No, so 2013. But he was talking about what's going on in the world before things have really hit the fan. And I'm sort of inspired by that, but I'm also, you know, that I think it's a natural evolution where we are now in our species, in our society. It's the natural outcome of living in a very separate, individualistic way, you know, as a society, and in a way of living in a place of survival where it's really every man for himself. You know, we sort of live in that way somehow, certainly from a Western point of view, that you know, you've got to sort of find your place in the world, and that's something you predominantly do alone. We're not so used to living in community. We don't really even know how that works when we've got that combined with our own challenges in terms of you know, setting up a life, setting up a family, all those things, the responsibilities. And I think those two things go hand in hand, the survival matrix and this, you know, separateness of our lives, the way that we live it. And I think that's coming to an end. And it's sort of, it's difficult because there's nothing there to replace it. But there's a big question about how we want to live. Do we want to continue living that way?
Mm.
And of course, sometimes it's a very difficult conversation because our whole environment, our way of being can be so trapped in survival that it's hard to even entertain that idea of living in another way. And compounded with that is this thing of separateness. And I think it's yes, we all live in a certain separate way, but men particularly, I think, suffer from this. I don't think, you know, I know, speaking for myself as well, there's sort of like a real desire for connection and belonging. We really crave having a tribe, having a community. And yet there are real challenges around that. Like, I think there's a sort of natural competition or comparison that goes on between, you know, this is something that came up through my man-to-man project, where I'd have a whole series of interviews with men talking about what's it like, your experience with other men. And it's almost that feeling that you talked about day one of a retreat, when you walk into a room and you've got 30 or 40 men there, and you're automatically just trying to weigh up the situation. Who's in the room with me? Who's my allies? Who's my enemies? Who's my competition? What's going on? There's all this sort of unconscious stuff which happens. And I think that's played out in the world in general, even, you know, just in terms of our interactions with the world. There's a certain sort of guardedness that we have in order to sort of function in the world. And yet, as you say, again, you know, being put in a space of where that's suspended for a moment, where there's a sort of invitation to just be in your heart, to be in your vulnerability, to speak your truth, and to do so in the company of other men, particularly, very quickly realize that we're all facing very similar challenges, and we suddenly have a sense of brotherhood. We suddenly have a sense that we're not alone in this, that actually some of the things you're saying are, you could be talking about my life, I could be talking about yours, you know. And that's virtually instantaneous, you know, after some very, very simple practices, we can access that feeling.
Wow. Hearing you talking about this, it really just kind of unlocks that memory of that experience, because I too, even though at the time, I've learned a little bit about men's work, I've done a little bit of, you know, retreats, practices, read a bunch of books, went through courses. Me stepping into that, I too, to some extent, saw, wow, competition, perhaps a little bit of a what's about to happen here. I wouldn't say a hostile environment, because it wasn't really hostile at all, but this kind of sense of competition, like, oh, we have different teams and we're going to be competing against them. So that very much really melted away as soon as we started the first couple of practices. Everything was just like, okay, I can relax here. The sharing circles and everything afterwards was just, I can express it just as pure magic. Like at the same time, I felt incredibly, what's the word I'm looking for? Incredibly familiar.
Yes.
So I can relate to what you're saying. And it's just that first step of you raising your hand, committing to an experience like this, or joining a course like what you're doing, which we're going to talk a little bit about towards the end of the podcast. But it's an interesting thing. I was speaking yesterday with my girlfriend, and I was telling her, you know, one step, if I took this like 10 years ago, the trajectory of my life, because of that one decision to join a men's circle or men's group, would have been totally different. Those 2 millimeters, that's one decision that could potentially, I mean, I don't want to get too much into metaphors, but the significance of something like this is huge. Like, I speak to men on this podcast, and I always ask him, like, how did you discover men's work? And it was just like one simple decision. Just join the men's circle. And afterwards, that my whole life took a totally different course. So yeah, this
Yeah.
is for all the men that are listening, and also women that are listening, because a lot of the men come there because of a recommendation of a woman. So
Yes.
yeah.
And all it takes is curiosity and that one step, you know, maybe
There you
that
go.
2 millimeters.
Mm-hmm.
That's and a lot of men would. That was the beauty of those courses, I think, because of the power and, you know, of what Rebel Wisdom had been setting up and the communication that had been happening. A lot of people would come into those places on the back of seeing a good video, which actually just spurred something. I'm like, oh, this is interesting. This conversation. I'll see what they're doing. But I love that word familiarity, because I think what we're tapping into, and I think it comes back to what one of your sort of interests, this thing of rites of passage, but also traditions. You know, this is something of a birthright that we've lost connection to. You know, actually joining in that space as with a group of men in that sort of environment where you're passing on knowledge and experiences. It feels very comfortable, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Strangely comfortable. And it's no surprise that, because I think we are tapping into something that's used to happen. It used to be the way that we would pass on knowledge. We would sort of, you know, we'd learn from our elders, and would be, you know, embraced and accepted by elders as part of a community group. We'd learn by being amongst them.
Totally. I can't remember. I think I was speaking to Evan from Integral Alpha. He was talking about how, I think David Data was exploring this field of epigenetics, and how certain things, both the good things and the traumas, are being passed, you know, through generations. I think of 6 or 7 generations of mice. I think they also made some correlations to humans. Don't quote me on all of this. I need to exactly dig into the specifics, but
I'm taking notes.
Thanks. I'm sure that I'm going to be fact checked on this. So yeah, I think all of these things have, you know, been passed through generations through our genes. Hence why some people are like, oh, why did this feel so familiar? Why did I feel so comfortable there after a while? And yeah, in this presence, in this groundedness, you can really see men kind of becoming men, and instead of being kind of the scared little boys, which, you know, frankly, everybody has. I still do. So yeah, it's a very, very healing experience. Very healing experience. Talking about healing experiences in men boys becoming men. Question from your experience working with men. You've been doing this for, you know, many years now. What do you think is missing today for men? And I understand it's a big question, so perhaps from your kind of lens and perspective.
What's missing for men? It's a big question. I mean, there's one.
Yeah.
I think what's really current for me right now is, and particularly as you mentioned earlier, as a father of a young son, which is such a gift, because it's like a real life revisiting of my own childhood, you know, and those strands which you talk about, the intergenerational strands. So as he sort of, he's only 2, he's a 2.5, and he's delightful. But what is missing, or I think almost is something what we're rediscovering, is a permission to have full expression. You know, to really learn what it's like to be in the world in full expression.
Wow.
And I refer particularly to emotions, like, you know, I think that the classic thing, and this is something I've been exploring a lot recently in my own life, is relationship with anger and rage and uncomfortable feelings. And the invitation to explore those things and to develop a relationship with those dark or shadow sides of ourselves, or more uncomfortable sides of ourselves, without trying to get rid of them. And I think this is actually very fresh for me, because it's something I've been exploring a lot and so really curious about, because I think there is a lot of anger and rage and frustration in men, which, you know, obviously we have explored a lot in workshops. But I think there's, even in myself, I feel like there's been an intention to try and explore these spaces to get rid of them rather than to accept them as part of human experience. And I think what's missing is a greater degree of understanding around that, because unfortunately the outcome of what happens when we don't have a healthy relationship with those things, it comes across to taint all of mankind and all men, you know, because of the less constructive expressions of those, the violence, the you know, the various things that happen when we're not I wouldn't even say in control, but we don't have a healthy relationship with those things. And my own exploration around that has been, actually, it's something I've been wanting to try and get rid of in my exploration, even, you know. So it's been something to wake up to, is like, actually, what's that about? There's a sort of a shame to even have those experiences. And I know from my experience as a child that I had experiences in my life where I was so uncomfortable to be angry that I didn't allow myself to be angry.
Wow.
Because of what I saw in my father and you know, and I saw in situations, I just didn't want to repeat that. So there was a sort of double-edged suppression.
Wow. Oof.
Even, you know, and so I think that's something which is probably missing in the way we look at boys and we look at their anger that comes up. And I've been fortunate to experience that, to actually be able to look at my son being angry and to completely taken over by anger and frustration, but not to judge him for it. And I actually posted something recently. This is the benefit of working with some very good mentors of mine, who said that, you know, anger and rage is a very powerful energy, which when we're young flows really freely. It's like a volcano. It comes from the second chakra. You know, it's like a ball of fire, and it's our passion. It's our life force. And what happens as we develop at a certain age, it starts to get cut off when the sort of criticism and the judgment comes in. And that's actually something that happens around 5 or 6. You know, suddenly you start to see that this thing isn't welcome. It's either not welcome externally, it's not welcome in myself, and you start suppressing it, and you start judging, you start creating an internal cutoff. And I think there's still that's not something which is really talked about in this. You know, I think there's a lot of talk about men's issues with anger as something to sort of control still. And actually, I think it would be really welcome to look at, actually, maybe the relationship with this is not around controlling it so much, but understanding it and integrating it and learning that it's saying something, learning what it's saying to us. You know, there's something which, and you know, that's a journey in itself. I mean, we could talk, that could be a whole other discussion. I don't want to turn this into a discussion about anger, but I think there's so much power. There's so much power in that. There's so much energy, which is seen as destructive, and yet it's not. It's potentially it's a real creative force.
I couldn't agree more. I too walk a similar path. This whole notion of anger, I think it's a taboo topic in society. Like, that's been seen as something bad. We don't want aggression, which is I think partially maybe a little bit propaganda. Partially there is a lot of shame. Like you said, it's not really an explored territory. But I think men really need this anger, this passion for life. This is how you create things. We're all creators at the end of the day, and anger and this is kind of an intertwined dance with passion, that you're able to create something. So, yeah, it's a question of how do you channel that rather than suppressing it, because trying to cut off something from yourself, it's there to serve a purpose. It's there to show you something. It's just for you to have the bravery and the curiosity to explore that and allow to be engaged in this dance. And I think also, I'm kind of answering my own question, but related to what you said, what's missing today for men is, I think, containers to be able to express these angers, the anger,
good, yeah.
and just the spaces where, because it's such a huge energy, like who gives you the thumbs up to say, yeah, now's the time, go and do it. Like in this space, go and like what am I supposed to do? Like I have all this kind of boiling anger in me. Like society tells me no,
where do I
don't
go?
do it.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
My girlfriend or wife tells me, no, not here. Like, what am I supposed to do with this? So, yeah, we need more containers, I think.
That's a much better answer. I think we'll go with your answer.
well, I always ask people this question because I'm genuinely curious about these questions. It's not just like, oh yeah, I think it's gonna make a good conversation. I'm, like you said, on an exploration of my own. So, yeah, but it was kind of based on what you said about anger. So you're kind of contributing to that, I think, massively.
Yeah, I think that's very much what is missing today for men. There is still, I think entrance points into the conversation, and I know it's happening more and more, but it's I'm curious about that. I'm curious what men who haven't come across men's work still think of it. Maybe I've been going into different domains just to inquire and to offer things. You know, I recently came back to New Zealand, which is my home country, and I spent time in quarantine just before Christmas. So when you come back, you're in 2 weeks in the hotel, lockdown, and I ended up joining a community, which is all a sort of support group for people who are going through that process. You know, there's people all around the world. It's quite a remarkable situation. Like you've got an exodus of maybe 50,000 people coming back into New Zealand after having lived overseas around the world. So I was sort of really intrigued by that, as in terms of like a migration. But I reached out and I have offered a men's circle for people to join, and there's been a bit of sort of like silence around it, and then one or two men reaching out. But and I think it's just such an odd proposition still for many men. It's like, why would I do that? You know, why would I go into a men's group? And as you say, it's like, and yet the value of, you know, there's always value for even that one or two men or whoever shows up. It's like, wow, that was something else. It's something I didn't even know I needed or would get anything from. So I am curious. Maybe that's what's missing, is the sort of, the spaces and the sort of understanding that that's what we need. And it's not necessarily, I think what I'm curious about too, I think it's not necessarily the last resort. I think it can often be seen as something that you do men's work if there's something wrong with you, or there's a big hole in your life or something.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's that at all. I think this is a natural space and a natural, you know, requirement we have is brotherhood and connection. And
can't agree more. I mean, similar experience happened to me when I invite men, because right now I'm in Bulgaria and I'm planning to start doing also content in Bulgarian because nobody's doing this here in Bulgaria. Nobody knows what it is about. Whenever I invite men, I just hear crickets. Like, I think that there needs to be obviously a lot more awareness around this. And people ask me, oh, is this kind of therapy? Or no, it's just training, man. Like we've done this for generations. We've, you know, gathered in the wilderness together. We've hunted together. We've competed. We've danced. We've sung together, away from the women. Yeah, but I think this whole idea, I think, has to mature back into society because we've been, like you said, detached, especially right now. More, I think we need connection more than ever. So I think people are perhaps opening up to this notion of, okay, what is out there besides my computer and Zoom calls every day, and perhaps maybe seeing my partner. And so perhaps the circumstances are forcing people to look for that connection. Is kind of permeating because of what we're going through right now.
Yeah, and I do think that's the opportunity right now. I'm really inspired by that, because everything's been thrown up in the air from many people, and a lot of things have been exposed. You know, so that you take time out from your life and you start to realize or start to assess how you're living it. and start questioning how you're living it, and the things that are in place. And it's a great time to really sort of question where you are in your life. Are you sort of living in alignment with yourself? Are you doing things you love to do? Are you doing things of value and purpose? I mean, it's all about having some connection with something else, which, really, when everything else is stripped away, what are we here for? It's a really important question.
I'm trying to when I sit down with myself, I always say, okay, let's try and normalize slowing down a little bit. And part of this is, again, being a little bit more introspective, asking all these questions. Okay, what am I doing all of this in the first place? Because sometimes, I have like mini burnouts or just super tired, perhaps frustrated. And that time, by virtue of having a little bit of awareness about what's happening, as opposed to like, oh yeah, just kind of trying to numb it with alcohol or drugs or whatever. Okay, perhaps this thing is there for a reason. It's a sign for something, that something is out of alignment. So yeah. Interesting. Which kind of brings me to another question I wanted to ask. What do you think we can do, particularly you as a father, what can we do as men for other generations, especially young kids? Because we've lost a lot of elders, a lot of generation of elders that are being stuck in care homes, and we're kind of losing all this wisdom. From your perspective, also being a father, like I mentioned, what can we do for other generations?
It's a good question as well. I think the immediate answer is to learn from them, really, just in a way. Like,
wow,
the benefit of having children, I think, is to really get a window into a life before we get, diverted. There's such a purity, there's such a sort of joy, there's such a sort of direct experience of life from children. So they really are our teachers, I think. And I think, the reminder, for me, they're sort of, they certainly call on me to be a better man. I think there's a symbiotic relationship between your children, and, they give me a lot of material to work on and to work with. But they really call on me to really step into being a man and being a parent and being an adult. And that's not to say they'll pull me back, or they'll trigger me and go, to go back into child states and less functional states and less constructive states. But I think the big difference and the big opportunity that we have, any of us who are committed to working on ourselves, is to be responsible and be accountable, and to include them, to let them have their voice, and to explain to them what's going on. The big difference between my generation and, my parents' generation is that there was a lot of silence. There was a lot of not being informed about what's going on, not being people not being accountable for, when you screw up, which you're going to do as a human anyway. But I think that's the big difference, and that's one thing I really am committed to, is to communicate to my children, to ask them how they are, and not to sort of try and cut them off, but also own up to when, look, yesterday I was really angry and I shouted at you, and I'm really sorry. How did you feel about that? What happened for you? And my daughter's sitting there saying, you know what, when you got angry, I was really scared.
Wow.
And I'm like, look, I'm really sorry. I understand that you would feel scared. I'm sorry that's the case. I'll try and do better. Sometimes that happens. Those things that dialogue, that communication, and that sort of humanity which is shared between the generations is so vital, you know. And that's almost the biggest gift, is to allow them to, you know, allow imperfection, but allow the sort of it be responsible as well in this sort of interaction.
Wow, I think this is one of the most profound answers I've heard, especially when you said it's a symbiotic relationship. We have to learn from them, because yes, they're incredibly. I don't have children right now, but by virtue of being with my partner right now, she's around children sometimes, and yeah, you can kind of see the innocent nature, and that can teach us a lot right now. We're kind of in this matrix of we need to do this and this and this, and it's a balance. And also what you said about the silence. I'm reading a book right now called Absent Fathers and Lost Sons, and they particularly explore the relationship between the father and the son, which seems to be the most wounded relationship of them all, and how whenever the father is silent, almost that kind of castrates the young man or the young boy. So you know, the example that you gave there about communicating about these things, super valuable. I've never had that with my father. We never sat down to discuss his problems or his you know, emotional journey, what he's going through right now, because frankly, it's difficult being a man, it's difficult being a woman, difficult being a human being. I think we kind of explored this in the previous podcast, is women are a little bit more maybe intuitive and kind of seek this connection with other women, whereas men kind of the lone wolf mentality. I'm kind of stick it in and not talk about it and put them fight, you know, the mask on, and we need to end these practices, man. It's not working.
Yeah, that's the wall of silence, but there's a lot going on underneath, isn't there? Always. And you know, and as children, we feel that loss. We feel that sort of, you know, we don't even know that something is missing, but we feel it, and we know, and we, you know, and we often end up searching for those things and wanting to have those conversations, but not knowing how to, because it's not something where it's modeled for us. Especially
what happens in those early development years. And I can see, even drawing some correlations with my father, I think, you know, he tried to do his best with what he got, but not realizing that he too was carrying wounds that he was just passing over to me unconsciously. I don't think any parent wants to do that consciously, or maybe some do, but yeah, it's just, and I kind of realized, okay, the buck stops with me. In the last, especially 9 months or so, I became more and more conscious about this, and these are wounds that I'm carrying. I spoke with him. Seems like he had it. He still has it. My grandfather had it. So yeah, coming back to this, generational trauma has been passed over.
Yes, and I'm glad you've touched on that, because I think that's also a very important thing. Is what, you know, your question: what can we do as men for other generations? It's to make a stand and actually go, look, I'm gonna look at these wounds, not just for myself, but for my ancestors, and to pay it forward, to sort of free my children and the generations to come from carrying these things. You know, the more work we can do to sort of heal ourselves, the more we free the generations to come to live a much more conscious life, I think.
Yeah, do your work, man. Especially all the men listening. Do the work.
Yeah.
That's there's no way around it. Yeah, doing the work is the shortcut to going through all of these. I'm curious, was there, because we kind of talked a lot about these topics in the previous podcast as well. So far, is there a question that you wanted me to ask you that I didn't?
Well, I know what brought me here, because my memory is not as good as yours. I can't remember what we talked about the first time, so and I didn't watch it back. But I did want to share. You know, maybe the question is what's of interest about the work that I'm doing, and the experience of the work that I'm doing, because I think it is a marriage for me. I've realized there's a marriage of self-realization work, which can often be quite a solitary pursuit for a a long time. You know, I know it has been for me to some degree. Like I'd sort of go into retreats and workshops, and I'd read books and find sources and do my own research, you know. But I'm really intrigued by the sort of what's available when you do that exploration in the company of other men. So you sort of, and that's the nature of how I've designed my course that I do. It's very much a sort of, it's shown to me what's available when you have dialogue around it as you're going through a process, you know, and you're not, what it can often be, I think there's a sort of, you can often slip into that thing of, oh, have you heard this? Oh, great. Oh, well, have you heard this one? And you go back into this competitive mode or comparison about who knows the most about whatever, you know. And I think it's a naturally sort of masculine thing that happens. There's sort of you're trying to sort of jostle for position. But if you're in a space of inquiry together, and in a, you know, a genuine space of, you know, curiosity and exploration, and then you're sharing stuff that comes up as you're going through stuff, it's quite remarkable. It's quite remarkable. And that to me became the essence of the course, of actually going on a journey alongside other men. And being in that space of seeing each other's resistance against stuff, or seeing what things come up and then exploring that together, you know, or things you had difficult with. And it's like, I was trying to look at the stuff and it's really, you know, I just can't do it. I just, you know, there's a real block around it. And there's a lot more sort of revealed in the journey when you're doing that with other people, you know, and you're sort of, and you've got that reflection going on. And I think that's, so, you know, I'm constantly looking for ways to communicate, which people might be interested in, or might sort of respond to people. But I think that alone is extremely powerful. That we all have to do the work, but it's so much more powerful if we do it together. It's not just something else. It's actually something which exponentially opens up something else. And it's an ongoing thing, because I think you know, when you start talking about your heart and start inquiring into it and what really is your purpose and what, you know, what gifts you have, firstly, you get feedback from other men who are like, well, yeah, I see those gifts. I see, you know, and see that that's something that you could really offer. And, you know, when you speak about what you're passionate about, look, I'm fully 100% behind you. And why don't you talk to these people? You suddenly get all these advocates for your, you know, for your vision and for your purpose. When normally that's seen as competitors, or somehow, you know, the people you're up against.
Yeah, I want to draw a parallel to this competition. You know, I've started a few projects, businesses, and always like, oh shit, like I find another competitor, and something in me just like, oh, like the moment I stepped into, really committed to doing more of this work, and you know, I'm still on my own journey, learning every day, as I'm sure everybody else is. I don't see competition as something bad. In fact, I invite it. I really want to, because I guess because it's not so much egocentric, it's a lot more ethnocentric focus, meaning putting this work more into the mainstream and men picking it up. So I'm very grateful when I hear another man, I see another brother, we can sit down, we can talk about it. By all means, go and check your website and the projects you're doing and the courses you're having and all the wisdom that you're offering. Really something else happens. Like, I think there was this African proverb, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go with someone else. Something like this. Hopefully I didn't butcher that one, but and it's so true. It's so true. Like something
I have
else
to say,
happens.
this one, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but you've reminded me of something.
Please.
It was actually in the last phase of the course where I was looking at vision. I thought, you know, even when I conceived the course, I thought, oh, maybe the outcome of the course is that you come to a point where you're actually talking about vision, and you're talking about where you're going in your life, and there's a bit more clarity around that. And as I was exploring that, I came across something which said, and it's a bit of I think it's a big key thing around vision, is that often we look at vision as something which we are capable of achieving by ourselves. So we look at it in terms of what we ourselves can do, and then we evaluate whether or not we can do it. And that's actually what holds us back, because we don't often express things big enough. We're not talking about what we want to see in the world, and then become a stand for it. And knowing that we alone can't bring that vision to life, it's not possible. We want to solve, the climate issue, or we want to see greater self-expression in men. It's like suddenly if you attach your, what's the expression? I can't remember. You attach your sort of flag to a wagon, but suddenly there's a sense of purpose beyond your own personal circumstances, and suddenly it has much more scope. As you say, it's like it's no longer about you, but it's something you want to be part of, and something you're invested in. Mm-hmm. It can be extreme, and there's something. For me, I've got something emerging around that. I've always been very passionate about my homeland, and really intrigued around indigenous traditions it's called Te Ao Māori. So it's the Māori worldview, the way that they perceive the universe, and our relationship, our responsibilities as guardians of the earth and of community and our family, those things. And it's something I've learned some aspects of, but I don't have direct connection with. But I've seen that as one of the root origins of discord and misunderstanding between Māori and Europeans, is that we don't have that shared understanding. And yet this is a universal knowledge. This is not something this is a human experience. This is a original human understanding of our place in the world, which we've lost connection with. So I'd like to be part of, developing our consciousness so that we can come to much more sort of what I perceive as an original understanding what it is to be human.
Wow.
And I think that there's a real opportunity to do that here, but it's something which it applies to the world. It's like a reconnection to a way of being which we've lost sight of. And it sort of excites me, because I'm only at the very start of that journey. And weirdly today I stumbled across someone who he's actually there's a word for it, I haven't written it down, but he's calls himself a warrior priest. And I just found him on Facebook and I made contact with him, but he's someone who's passing on knowledge of Te Ao Māori and talking about our relationship with the world in that way. So I'm really excited about making connection and learning from people like that, and trying to feed into that.
I'm excited about you just listening to this. Wow. Great.
Well, again, I think there's a familiarity to this. I think we all know this somewhere in our being, that we're not just here discrete Pav or Kevin on the earth. We come from a generation, a lineage right back to year dot of, so of course we carry all that. It lives with us today, and we have an opportunity to hold that burden heavily or lightly, but also, create something for the generations to come by understanding our place in the world. So there's a beautiful synthesis of humility and responsibility.
Wow. Whew. Okay, a lot of things to ponder about and meditate and to think about. People that are resonating with your message, all the wisdom that you're sharing, where can they find more about you? Perhaps mention the course that you're about to launch soon, or relaunch rather.
Well, I have my site under my name. I think I'll share those links with you, kevinhelas.com. But I work under the name Life Navigation, which is deliberate. I'm not, it's really like that's the role that I work with men mostly. I like to offer guidance, help navigate, help explore. So yeah, that's a place to look at. And obviously the course I'm launching actually in a month today. So it starts on April the 11th. called A Place to Stand, and it's very much a space for that inquiry and a personal exploration, and I call it a personal exploration and self-realization in the company of other men. And that sort of sums it up. But it's a committed 8-week process you go through alongside other men with my guidance and with my contribution. And it's really exciting. You know, it's something I tend to run out 2 or 3 times a year. And I'm on the lookout for people who want to be part of that and want to sort of join in on that process. Yeah.
I think by the time the podcast airs, I think this is going to be exactly in alignment with starting that. So hopefully more people can hear that, more people can join, because that's the work, man. That's the work that we need to be doing. We ought to be doing, rather. Yeah. Cool.
Well, credit to you, Pav, for it's inspiring to see, you know, Man with Purpose pop up so regularly. So, you know, I get your commitment to this and your purpose, you know, and you're doing a great work.
Actually, you guys are doing all the work. I'm just trying to facilitate all of this so I can distill it into a book and then share it with the world. But that's all you, like people like yourself, men like yourself that are, you know, stepping into the fire every day and going through whatever they need to go through. That's it. I'm just an observer. I'm very fortunate to be in kind of the steering wheel sometimes, and let's see where the conversation goes. So credit to you. I'm just trying to be consistent. That's all.
Yeah. Fantastic.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much, Kevin. Right. For people that, you know, wanna learn more, I'm gonna put all the links in the show notes. So please go check out Kevin's website, the course, etc. Connect with Kevin on social media, and that's it for today, folks. I'll see you in the next episode. Ciao.